Hurricane season returns to the Gulf Coast June 1st. With Katrina, Rita, and Ike in our rearview mirrors, what plans have been put in place to ensure our safety and a swift recovery should we be hit hard again this season? What are the chances of a huge storm coming ashore in 2010? What has been done to establish a swift and effective evacuation? And how ready is our region should we lose power, water, or shelter? Tonight, what lessons have we learned and what new plans are in place? I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Thanks to our location and proximity to the coast, Houston, Galveston, and the surrounding areas will always be open to the wrath of Mother Nature. In 1961, Hurricane Carla and her 22-foot storm surges took the lives of 31 Texans. Almost 22 years later, Hurricane Alicia reminded us of the power of wind and rain. In addition to nearly a foot of rain falling and winds up to 107 miles per hour, over 750,000 homes went without electricity and over 20 tornadoes were formed. The new century has brought with it a relentless attack of storms and hurricanes, starting in 2001 with Tropical Storm Allison, leaving 30,000 people homeless and costing us dearly, over $5 billion in damages and more than 40 lives lost. To date, the costliest hurricane of all time remains 2005's Hurricane Katrina at over $80 billion, not to mention the 300,000 displaced people and the death of close to 2,000 individuals. That same year, amidst the largest evacuation in U.S. history, Hurricane Rita forced over 3 million people to leave their homes, many of which found themselves trapped in hellish commutes and in a sea of stalled out and stranded vehicles. In the end, Rita cost us over 100 lives in Texas, 35 in Harris County alone. And 2008's Hurricane Ike forced a mandatory evacuation for low-lying areas around Houston. Galveston Island suffered massive flooding, and Bolivar was practically wiped off the map, thanks to 12 feet of water which blanketed the peninsula. An electrical failure left millions without power, some for up to a month. Eventually, our area will face off again against Mother Nature. But when this time comes, will we be better prepared? Will evacuation routes be clear? Will suffering be reduced? And will more lives be saved? Joining us tonight are Sarita Reyes Fulgencio, Director of Disaster Services, American Red Cross, Greater Houston Area Chapter; Dr. Neil Frank, Meteorologist and former Director of the National Hurricane Center; and Sharon Nalls, Assistant Director, Emergency Management Coordinator, City of Houston. Welcome to you all. First of all, we see in that story right there, and I think it sends chills up everyone's spine, worrying about what's going to come next. Doc, we'll start with you. What are we expecting? What can we gauge might be happening?
Well, we're in a very active period of hurricanes at the present time. It's interesting if you take a look at the hurricane activity in the Atlantic, we go through periods of a lot of storms, a lot of action. We think that's related to the water temperatures in the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. So when the water temperatures are warm, we have more hurricanes. They tend to be stronger. When the water temperatures cool off, then we find a period when we have fewer hurricanes.
Now, we have warm temperatures this year, right?
We have warm temperatures. And see, the lifetime of this warm versus cold period is something in the order of 20 or 30 years. So in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the early 90s, the water was cold, and we had a minimum of hurricane activity. Well, that all came to a screeching halt in 1995 when we had 19 named storms that year. And now we're back into a warm period, and so we're seeing a lot more hurricane activity.
And so this is cyclical, you're saying?
Oh, yeah.
If we ride this out for a few more years, we might go back
and we've been in this period now for 15 years. If past history is any indication, we may stay in it for another 5 to 10 years. So hurricanes have returned to the United States, not just to Texas, particularly along the East Coast. And I'm afraid that if we continue to see the hurricane activity and the increase in growth, that's the real problem. It's a man-made problem in the sense that we are located in areas where we probably shouldn't be located.
Just so people don't misunderstand, hurricane development over time is not like a rubber band being stressed. Each time it's unique and unto itself. So you can't say, as we've had stronger storms before, this one's going to be bigger than before. It doesn't work like that.
No. You know, you can go back into the 1800s and find some really powerful hurricanes at that time. We tend to think, well, Katrina and Rita, we've never seen anything like that. Well, in 1875, Indianola, you've heard of Indianola, down on Matagorda Bay, the South Shore, at one time was a thriving community of some 20 or 30,000 people, and it was really nicked hard in 1775, and then 1886 it just wiped it out, and so there's nothing left of Indianola at the present time. So the hurricanes that we're seeing today are not that much more powerful than they have been in the distant past. They're more powerful than they were in the 60s and the 70s.
Okay, now Sharon, we know something is going to probably hit us. That as much as we can be assured of. From where we live and what's going on and what we've seen, something's going to come again.
Right.
What are we doing to make sure we don't have all of the nightmares? I know we'll have some. There'll always be issues and problems when Mother Nature rears up like she has. But what can we do? What is being put in place to help protect and move us forward?
Well, first of all, we can determine whether or not we want to be a victim, or do we want to be able to deal with the storm when it comes, or do we want to be a responder? And everyone has that role. Government has that role. If we don't plan for what we need to do in moving our people, moving our resources, taking care of our buildings, then we can become victimized by it. The general public has the same issue. If they don't plan, if they don't make kits, if they don't stay informed about what's going on in regards to the weather at the time, they can become more victimized than they would have been if they had been prepared in advance. If they wish to be a responder, to take care of themselves individually first, then their families, then their neighbor, then their street, they can actually go through training and become a certified emergency response team member or a CERT team member. There are classes that are held in the community specifically for that so that they can help respond when an incident comes about. That is actually a course that came out of the results of the Nimitz Freeway collapse from the earthquake in California and the benefits that it takes. You who are in a neighborhood, you can get there faster than probably we can immediately after the event.
If you're interested in this, how do you get trained?
You can call our office at 713-884-4500, and we can give you information about the classes. There are online ways to get to the classes as well through
We'll
Harris
have that
County.
up on our website. We'll give that at the end of the show so people can
So
get it. Also, your website is www.HoustonOEM.net.
Yes.
Okay, we'll put that up later on the website, and we'll repeat it again throughout the show.
And then tied to that is we do have a set of population that needs additional help. They have special needs, ranging from my car won't make a trip to outside of the Houston area, or I have grown up in Houston and I'm dependent upon the metro system to move around, so I don't have a means mechanically to evacuate, so I need assistance. To people who have medical special needs, folks who have been released from the hospital, who have a particular recovery aspect that's occurring in their home. And until they're fully recovered, they have a medical need to get evacuated. Well, we need those individuals, if they don't have a plan or they don't have something called a hurricane helper or a family member or a church or some other organization to help them, we need them to pre-register so that we can plan in advance for what type of transportation asset is needed to move them out of harm's way.
I'm going to say that some people believe that big organizations, the city, the Red Cross, kind of know ahead of time or have a feeling ahead of time and plan for things. So I'm wondering, looking at this coming season, 2010, what has been planned? What are we looking and expecting from your organizational points of view? And I want to start over with Sarita.
I'll tell you, as Sharon and all our local government agencies have their hands full directing the evacuation, we're going to also have our hands full trying to open shelters to have somewhere to put all the evacuees.
But you've budgeted. Someone has budgeted somewhere and said, for 2010, we're probably going to need this much. Is it a very large budgeting this year? Are you guys expecting us to be hit hard?
We always plan for a lot. And what we found after Ike was with the widespread power outage, it made it a lot more difficult for us to open shelters because our facilities where we had planned to open them didn't have power. We can't send people to shelters that don't have power. So we've been collaborating a lot closer with emergency management so that we can help some of those facilities get generators. You know, something that we struggled with right after Ike. So we have a lot more agreements. We've got a lot of volunteers being trained in leadership positions, but we're also, like I said, working a lot more closer with our partners so that we can get resources to the facilities we've identified to be able to open them as a shelter a lot quicker than we did during Ike.
Yeah. Okay, now there's one thing I want to hit on before we get into all the conversation, just open it all up. None of us are experts on insurance and how the insurance industry works, but one thing we all pretty much are sure on is that once a storm hits a certain point or is named, you can't get hurricane insurance anymore. At a certain period in time, you might not be able to get the insurances you need. Our best advice is get insurance now?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You know, that's
Today.
one of the things that everybody can do.
They
Right.
call today, yeah.
You can get that insurance today. Don't wait until you see that the warning's posted someplace.
Because then it's too late. They will not issue you a policy after it hits the season. I think that kind of talks about everything we're talking about here is to be better prepared ahead of time, and then we can weather these storms any way we need.
Exactly.
What would you give advice to someone out there right now? What should they have done already?
Insurance is one of those. They should be putting together their kit that has key documents.
Let's go through that kit. What should be in it?
Well, one of the things is obviously your insurance papers. You don't want to leave them in a place and then they become damaged and you can't refer back to them. So your insurance papers, information regarding your medical issues.
I'm going to stop right there and go back to the insurance before we even get going. We were talking before we went on air saying, know what's in those.
That's
Not
exactly
just
right.
save them, but go through your policy, see exactly what you are being covered for. We were talking about whether or not you have flood insurance or not.
Right.
Most people don't have flood insurance. It's not part of their homeowner policy, correct?
Right. Most people assume their homeowner policy or their rental policy is covering all of that when it really doesn't. It doesn't cover floods.
Okay, so talk with your insurance agent. Make
That's
sure
right.
you know what you have covered.
Exactly.
You know, I'm going to make a point here. I've had insurance agents tell me that you don't have to have insurance if you're not in the floodplain. That's not true.
Yeah.
Okay. As a matter of fact, in Allison in 2001, 70% of the people that got flooded didn't have flood insurance because they weren't in that floodplain.
Right.
And anytime you get 5 to 10 inches of rain per hour, and that rain continues for 3 or 4 hours, I don't care where you are in this city, there's a good chance that you're going to be flooded. So check that flood insurance policy.
You know, talking about flooding and the city, I have to ask you, what are the city plans, if you know the answer to this, to try and help so that the city doesn't flood? It doesn't seem like everything should always flood, and I'm sure a lot of people are concerned about that. What have we been doing since in the last 2 years to make sure this goes a little smoother?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. Doc mentioned earlier we're living in an area where we put ourselves at risk for hurricanes. We also happen to be living in an area where we put ourselves at risk for flooding.
Right.
The geography of the state is designed for us to be the draining basin for other areas in the state, and yet we develop ourselves here because it's close to the coastline for shipping purposes and all those sorts of things, and that's what creates the problem. The more concrete you pour, the greater the risk for the flooding now becomes because the water has no place to go. So one of the things we have to do is strictly enforce the issuance of permits, and when you have building construction going on, that you do retention ponds. We've done mitigation projects like down in the Texas Medical Center. There was a massive project that was put in after Tropical Storm Allison to alleviate some of the flooding, to push it into the drainage system and get it out of the area. The other side of the coin is our streets flood, and there's a reason.
Right.
There's a reason for that. Much rather have a street flood than your home or your business. So when we ask people to stay indoors or to not get out in these streets when the water is rising, we ask that they really follow that, because the intention is let the street fill with water and move the water out instead of filling it into your building or into your home.
Good point. Now, I did cut you off when you were talking about the emergency kits.
That's all right.
I want to make sure we get
That's
through
all
those
right.
before we get into everything else.
But going back to flooding, if I could
Okay.
say something,
Yeah, sure.
because we've responded to lots of floods in the past, and some of the same clients. If you know you live in a flooding area, pick your clothes up, your bedding, get all your food off of the floor so that it won't flood. The basic things that people need after any disaster: food, clothing, medications. Just make sure it's high so that it doesn't get ruined if you know you live in a flood area.
A sad thing to say, we have had many opportunities to see what can happen.
Yes.
So if we're not covering our own homes, taking care of ourselves, who's to blame? We know these things happen. Emergency kit. I'm going to get through this kit. What's in the kit?
Your
documents we've got.
Documents, things like I wear glasses, so it would be helpful for me to have a spare pair of glasses in there. What happens if these were to break? You wouldn't want to give me something to read and sign because I wouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
Talk with your doctor about any medications that you might have, so that you might have an extra prescription to put in there. That's one of the things that we really noticed with Katrina. People evacuated, they came to Houston, and they had absolutely no way to get their medications refilled. There was no way to connect back to the pharmacy where they had originally got it done. There was no way to connect back to their physician. So that's kind of important to have medical information in your kit.
And rotate that in your kit.
Yes.
If you've got it in your kit, get your
Yes.
new prescriptions, switch them out so you keep fresh in the kit.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's important to have food items that don't necessarily have to be cooked. If you're going to use food items that are in a can, make sure you have a manual can opener, not an electric one. Change of clothing, things to entertain children if you have them. If you have a pet, it's important to have their records, their shot records, things to feed them with. All of those sorts of things that would need to go in there. Things that you use on a regular daily basis that are critical, that if you didn't have them, you want to have them in the kit so that when the disaster happens, regardless of whether it's hurricanes, floods, or whatever it is, that you can pick up that kit and go with it and know you're prepared.
Part of the emergency documents that Sharon mentioned should be a copy of your identification, your driver's license for children, birth certificates, because what happened during Katrina when people relocated, a lot of them relocated without ID. It's going to be very difficult to get assistance from a nonprofit or a church or even your insurance company if you can't prove where you live. So it's important people keep the current, their IDs current with their current address and keep copies of them somewhere in case they have to evacuate. They have that.
And let me just run through. UT has put out a list of what they said you should have in your kit, and it's some of the things we said. You guys have said some other that aren't in there. Gallon of water per person per day for about a week's worth. So 7 gallons of water per person you should have. 7-day supply of all medications. First aid kit. Consumable foods that don't require cooking. Handheld can opener. Don't pack your electric can opener. It's not going to help you. Thick-soled shoes, preferably rubber-soled or boots. Rain gear, sturdy work gloves, fresh batteries, flashlights, and portable radio. Now they do have the digital portable TVs, but people should be aware that if they have a television set from a while ago, those don't work anymore thanks to the digital transition. So those don't work. Duct tape. Fire extinguisher that's been recently tested, and the final thing, which we have missed mentioning, a reasonably full tank of gas. Make sure your car has gas in it.
And maybe some cash, because with widespread power outage, I mean, the ATM across from us didn't work the 2 days after Ike still.
Good point.
Because, ATMs aren't going to work if there's a lot of power outage all over town. So a small amount of cash for important things.
Okay. Doc, a lot of people are concerned with the oil spill that's going on right now, and I still don't have a good understanding of this, and we've done shows on it already. If a hurricane should move across an area where there is the oil slick, and then it comes to land, what do we experience here? And I know there are lots of variables in that, but what's the reasonable understanding of what goes on?
Well, I don't think anyone really knows, because when you get a hurricane and you have waves of 40 or 50, 60 feet, that oil is going to be really mixed a lot, and I don't know what's going to happen. You're also going to have an impact down deeper in the water, and how much of that oil then will be brought to the surface. I don't know, as I have the knowledge to say what would happen in that case. Any way you look at it, it probably wouldn't be good.
Understanding that the oil doesn't help weigh down the water, in some way would help keep the...
Not with a 60-foot wave.
No, it's not going to help us in any way then. But should we expect, or could we expect, and I know this is speculation, if it comes ashore, if there is oil in the hurricane, I don't know exactly how that water disperses from the funnel. What happens there? Would oil be splattered around? Would it be like that, or doesn't it work that way?
Well, as I say, you get all this mixing of these huge waves and the oil that's there, and I think we need to put that in perspective. Yes, it is very bad, but the volume of oil out there compared to the volume of the Gulf of Mexico is far different. And so when you begin to mix it up with huge waves, I don't know what's going to happen. We may see a lot, kind of oily things floating in the air, attached to some of these raindrops. But I wouldn't want to speculate. I just don't know.
And in closing that area of it, I would assume that it's probably worse for the recovery effort that's going on. If a hurricane came through where the BP rig is right now, that probably wouldn't be good for any of us. When we look at what we can expect to happen from a commute, we mentioned that at the top of the read. We showed it in the story at the top. So many people in Houston left before and got stuck in those nightmare commutes. Now, talking to folks here in Houston, they say, I'm not leaving, I'm staying put. Talk to folks in Galveston and down in Bolivar, they're out of there. They're not going to stay. Right. What have we put in place to make sure that it is a swift exit and reentry?
Starting with the evacuation process. One of the mistakes that I think occurred with Rita was it was unclear about who needed to go and who didn't need to go. So immediately after that, we created, using the storm surge risk models that existed from FEMA and from the state of Texas, we laid zip code maps, because most people know their zip codes, over the top of those. We now use zip codes to issue the evacuation order that comes out from all of our region south of us. And Houston needs to understand that it's the hourglass that everyone else has to pass through. There are 3 zip codes in the Houston area that would be in a mandatory evacuation if the mayor were to issue it. There are zip codes in all of Pasadena, all of Galveston County. The next step with those zip codes is to understand that in order to move those at greatest risk, we need to let those who are closest to the coast go first. So there's a staggered evacuation process that now exists in which all of the jurisdictions have agreed upon.
Okay, I'm sitting at home, I hear you saying that, and what I'm thinking is, okay, I saw what happened before. These folks are going to be coming through, they're going to start stalling out, and I'm leaving anyway. I don't care. If you guys start evacuating some area, what ensures that I'm going to be able to get out of here in a timely fashion?
There's a combination of things that were done. One is issuing the zip code order for evacuation so that the right people know they're the ones at risk who need to leave. The second thing that was done through the state is the shoulder lane has now been designated as an extra lane to add capacity on the roadways. In addition to that, if that capacity needs to grow, you have contraflow lanes that have now been created. They were implemented on the fly during Rita to alleviate the congestion. Now that plan is permanently in place. And if you go up 45 towards Dallas or out I-10 towards San Antonio or up 290 towards Austin, you'll see the signs that tell you where the contraflow lanes will begin. And what will occur is they will open up and allow some of the traffic that's on the northbound lanes to move to the southbound lanes to expand our capability.
Another
to move those
problem
folks.
Everyone talks about is the gasoline, running out of gas. What are you going to do for that?
The gasoline, the state actually went out with the manufacturers and the distributors of fuel. They created a fuel desk that helps push gasoline into the area where they're expecting the storms to come. You will see dynamic message signs on the freeways that are encouraging everybody to fill up with gas. Put gas in your car now. They will continue to surge fuel not only into our area, but all along those evacuation routes, so that folks don't have an issue with fuel while they're moving forward.
Sarita, you seem to be chomping at the bit there.
I think there's a couple of things, though, that people can do to help with an evacuation if we were to have one. Also, in addition to having a kit, people need to have a plan. I think part of the plan is to always, during hurricane season at the very least, always keep your gas tank at least half full. Don't plan to evacuate on an empty tank of gas. The other thing is plan on how many vehicles you evacuate. Not every family needs to evacuate with both of their vehicles or as many vehicles as they own, because that's just going to put more congestion on the freeways and make their job harder. So, have a plan how you're going to evacuate and which car the family will evacuate in to cut down on the congestion.
Doc, a question for you in all of this is, watching all of these people stall out on the highways in the past, and then I think if a hurricane is really coming through, is it so safe for us to be in these little cars on the highway, or would it have been safer in our home with the strength of what's going to come?
Well, you raise an interesting question because it depends on your building codes. And see, Sharon, one of the dilemmas that I have, we can identify the areas that are going to be flooded by the storm surge. The storm surge is this dome of water that rolls in at the time the hurricane makes landfall, and that's the one that's what caught us in Ike. Well, yeah, we can identify those people. They are the ones that need to evacuate first. But then there's a whole bunch of us that live inland, maybe as far west as Katy, as far north as Conroe. With a Category 5 storm, you could see 100-mile-an-hour winds there. Our building codes are designed basically for 75-mile-an-hour winds. So I'm not going to tell somebody who lives in the west part of Houston, oh, you can't evacuate because you're not in the evacuation zone. That's the dilemma. And that was the dilemma we had in Ike. I did not go on the air and tell people that lived inland, you just stay in your home because you're not going to be flooded. No, what if the roof blows off?
Right.
And you just don't want to be in an area where there's winds of 100 miles an hour.
And that's a valid point. I'm not trying to say that we're telling people not to evacuate.
Right.
What we are trying to tell folks is that those of you who are in a risk zone for storm surge flooding, they need to go. That's the reason why it's a mandatory evacuation order for them.
Okay.
We do have a product that is called Houston Hide from the Wind. It was used during Ike to project wind speeds that could be experienced from that particular hurricane as it passes through our area based upon its current forecast at the time.
And I'm going to have to stop you right there because they're telling me we are out of time, but I'm going to give your phone number. It's 713-884-4500 or the web HoustonOEM.net. You can visit all of that. You'll find that at our website at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local programs bar and it'll say Houston 8. Click to that and you'll find us. That does it for us tonight. Remember, use common sense, be prepared, and everything should go better than if you're not. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week. Good night.